one thing: the great state of Indiana will stand with the great state of Arizona to protect your border. I can assure you. And people do care because it's not an issue of one state, it's a national security issue. And unfortunately, we can debate and deliberate and a lot of us should have disagreement, but we're always able to come together to protect our country. And this is a crisis, it's a national security crisis, it's unacceptable. It's unfortunate that my colleagues from this committee couldn't come here today to see what's really happening and how the impact of real life. But I just want to have a couple questions to this panel, you know. And, you know, I grew up in a communist totalitarian regime under mob rules, so, you know, have lots of guns and ammunition. We have a constitutional carry in Indiana, so I am good to go, but that's not where we want to go. And I sometimes, like, wonder, you know, listen, if I would have come here illegally, I would really not have to go through all of the struggles I had to go for the last 23 years. You know, so my question is for Dr. Trenchel. When I was listening to you, and I thought, like, okay, you know, as a legal immigrant or legal citizen in this country, you know, you have to pay for health care, you have to get insurance, you have to work and do all these different things. Isn't it we're creating perverse incentives, you know, for people to come here legally? Because it's not just hurting people that try to be within the system, but actually you get a free ride, and we have now illegal immigration to welfare. So I would like you to comment on that.
I agree, you know, and we're required by law to see all comers and to provide the same level of care we do to everyone else. And when a migrant comes in that crosses the border without insurance, without a payment plan, we give them the same health care we provide to the other residents of our community. And we have no ability to bill. We don't know where they're going. We don't know if their name is right. We don't know anything about them.
It's unfortunate that we start incentivizing lawlessness in our country. I have a question to the sheriff, and I think really, you know, my colleagues on the other side always talking about this human trafficking and what was happening, and it's a humanitarian crisis too, because these people become slaves. It's like modern day slavery to cartels with a lot of big money made on these people. And I understand they're desperate, but we created perverse incentives. So I want you to comment on human trafficking and also on other issues of getaways, how dangerous it is.
No, I will use the word from the Yuma Border Patrol Chief. It's narco-slavery, every bit of it that we are seeing along our border, and it's going to the interior throughout the United States. There's indentured servitude in a lot of these states and counties because of the cartels controlling the narrative right now. So there's not been many sheriffs that I have ran into that have not had to investigate those types of crimes. We've seen in the past where you'd had indentured servitude discovered by Border Patrol agents happening in the Carolinas, 3,500 cases of children being used as recycled to get more people in. So we have seen the indentured servitude. If you can't pay, you're going to pay another way.
Well, thank you for your service, and I want to let you know we have a great sheriffs in the state of Indiana. If you need help, please let us know, because if we cannot fix it at the federal level, states can also step up and help each other. Mr. Lyons, some quick question, even though I have a little problem with being called flyover state, so I need to work on that, and I hopefully visit Indiana more often, because we have a lot of great things. It's a great state, as well as you have a great state here too, as a farmer from flyover state, but actually farmer, you know, I want to just have a quick question for you. What's happening right now with agriculture? And you have, I was actually surprised in some of the numbers. Isn't really posed some issues with food safety and food security? What's really happening at the border?
So it's a challenge along the border, but our agriculture practices here in Yuma exceed the expectations and even the minimum standards or the maximum standards of any growers against any region in the United States. They have about a 500-page volume that they use. It's self-imposed to make sure, and they have hired people to watch over. We have had entry into fields, and at that point in time, depending upon what they've been able to locate, they either plow it under or remove it altogether.
But it would add that additional cost, which eventually will be passed on to consumer, right? Because
Absolutely.
it's extra cost that everyone has to do, because ultimately you have to be able to survive and pay money to be able to run your business.
Ms. Spartz, may I comment a little bit just on the narco trafficking of human trafficking? It was interesting, just before the China virus hit, the AP did a story, and they were talking about the LA basin specifically. but they estimated that between 65 and 75% of all manual labor was undocumented in the LA basin. And that remains a challenge and a problem today, because many of these people, as they come across the border, are still subject to the cartels to pay a debt and are indefinitely remanded to their service. They actually never leave.
I think it's unfortunate. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's unfortunate that we cannot have consensus on the issues of immigration and border security. And it's unfortunate, and I have to agree with my Democrat colleagues, it's not just a President Biden crisis, it's a national security crisis, but President Biden incentivizes very perverse behaviors that benefit cartels, human trafficking, drug trafficking, and poses really danger to our country, because we now overwhelm Border Patrol that they cannot do their job effectively. And I think that should be something that we should be dealing, but I don't see any desire, unfortunately, on the other side to work on this, and it's very sad for me to see that, because we do want to have good legal immigration system, and now it's really much easier to immigrate to this country legally. We give a lot of benefits, and as a legal immigrant, it's really very troublesome procedures, and it's really sad that where we are. But, you know, and we actually did go to the border. I've been in several sectors to see what's happening, and actually where the border wall is, it helps, you know, to Border Patrol to control the situation, but this administration in many places left the gates open, you know, and, you know, cartels are not very dumb. When you have a 20 cars escort of Congress members, they're not that stupid with police flashing lights. They're going to wait until we leave and then try to cross the border, but that's beyond that discussion. But I wanted to bring up attention to one of the issues, and which is really unfortunate that we cannot talk about too, and it was deleted in this proposed amendments. It's related to Subcommittee Administrative State Regulatory Reform and Antitrust, the issues of settlement procedures and student settle procedures, where you know, a lot of activist agencies and groups have these friendly lawsuits, and then they settle these suits, circumvent the public rulemaking process. They also pay special interest group, you know, big sums of money, billions of dollars, you know, and special interest group priorities are above the public interest. It's really causing taxpayers a lot of money, undermines Administrative Procedures Act, and really is unconstitutional. We shouldn't just have an oversight. Senator Grassley and I introduced bill last Congress and sent letter to President Biden. It's unacceptable. We are legislative branch, and we're the only branch should be able to put laws on the books. We cannot have these fake procedures and to circumvent all existing procedures, pay a ton of money, and then put laws on the books. I mean, the public is hurt by doing that, not just financially, but bad laws can get on the book like that. So I think this is a very serious situation. I hope we're not just going to do oversight of that, but actually look how we can pass legislation so these loopholes are going to be closed in our code, because we have so much broad authority. We give so much, you know, jurisdiction to executive branch and don't do oversight effectively. We cannot even pass normal budget, and they just send stupid letters, and they send us back responses, and sometimes don't even send responses on some serious issues. So I think we have to figure out how we come together and have less politics. Unfortunately, I don't think it's happening right now, but I do hope there are a few issues, including border security, that maybe we can come together as Republicans and Democrats, because it's humanitarian crisis. These people being used as pawns, and a lot of bad people are benefiting from them, but it is also national security crisis, and it's a very serious situation. I've been in 6 sectors, you know, since I've been in Congress for 2 years. I've been in 3 states. The situations are different in each state, but it's a serious situation all across the board. And I think a lot of bad people have an opportunity to take weaknesses of our system and utilize this, and we need to protect the American people. That is our duty, and we need to, regardless who's in charge, Democrat or Republican, we need to question executive branch enforcement of the law. and look at this, because it is a total insanity what's happening in our border. And I did go with my Democrat colleagues, and last Congress, we'll be happy to go again, because this is something we need to find common ground, and I yield back.
Gentlewoman's time has expired. I'd like to recognize Ms. Spartz from Indiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, this language sounds more like a resolution, not an oversight, but I actually have a different perspective, because I think this actually issue is already covered in our rules and in a much broader way, which is how it should be dealing, because if you look on page 15, last paragraph, we actually already have oversight of civil liberty abuses. And it doesn't limit to any specific abuses. It says a select subcommittee will examine issues related to the protection of civil liberties of citizens of the United States, including whether the civil liberties of citizens of the United States have been violated by executive branch agencies. I think there is no need to go to very political language and details and argue about it. This is already included, and my Democrat colleagues will have an opportunity to include other oversight things within already this oversight plan. So I think there is no need for this specific amendment, and I would urge my colleagues not to support it.
Gentlelady, you.
I yield to the gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you.
To recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm one person that always believed that the greatest of our country is the freedoms and greatness of our people. And someone who came from a communist country, it appalled me what's happening in our country. And I said that, unfortunately, Congress became a circus and charade. Unfortunately, what's happening in your district is also a circuit and charade. And I appreciate people being here, Mr. Alba, Ms. Harrison, Ms. Brame, and actually sharing your personal story. And I apologize on behalf of the Congress. I also appreciate Mr. Holden sitting here and actually willing to challenge your own party. I actually do it quite a lot. And a lot of people in your party don't have that strength, and I hope we can see more of that. You know, on the way here, one of my constituents texted me. We had police officer suicide. We had police officer killed in the district last year. We have a serious problem with our criminal justice system. Our government is set up to protect people's rights to life, liberty, and property, and it's not doing it. People play in politics, and it is one of the core functions, and this committee has that function. So I appreciate Mr. Chairman actually having field hearing. I actually appreciate my Democrat colleagues showed up this time, because I hope we'll do more. Because the city of Indianapolis has higher murder rates than the city of Chicago, and we have a Democrat prosecutor. He is not enforcing the crime, the laws. And what the problem is what we have right now, and I actually agree with Mr. Goldman and Lofgren about jurisdiction. It's a challenge. I want to hear what we can do, what we shouldn't be doing, and I hope we will have more discussion about jurisdiction, because we're overreaching significantly on the states' rights. And a former state senator, I have a huge problem with that. I also agree with, at least appreciate Mr. Ivey said, you know what, it's all about gun control. At least he's honest, okay? Not like do all these talking points. Like I was listening to TV this morning. They already say, oh, committee came about talking about all the break. I honestly don't give about him. I actually care what is happening in this country. And I think it's important for us to hear from we the people, because people are not heard in D.C. There is no lobby for the people in Washington, D.C. So hopefully you start being more active in that. I also think, Mr. Aspiad said, follow the money. I actually would like to follow the money. Why are we not dealing with hospital monopolies that Chuck Schumer is supporting so much? Why are we not dealing with the border situation that all those NGOs get money, who knows what the hell they're doing with that, and why we have the crises with all the situation. But I want to try to ask you, if we want to find common ground, I actually, on the criminal justice subcommittee, tried to pass some laws on a bipartisan basis. But is there any in your party except gun control? I know that Ms. Fisher, you mentioned about, the safe storage and everything. I just don't see anything how I am and my kids are going to be safer if I lock up my guns. I just feel, actually, as a female, I feel not as safe. And I don't know how long overwhelmed police officers will take them now to help us. So I think it's really strange for me. We try to take, protection from law-abiding citizens and believe that criminals are not going to get guns. I mean, there is anything else except gun control. Maybe we should reform education and have some wraparound preventive services and have more competition in education, that these kids actually taught some values. They don't have a 10% or 8% literacy rate that they have to get into gangs. Is there anything else you can say except gun control?
So comprehensive solutions to reducing violence in New York City have actually been incredibly effective. And that's
but
why
look,
if I
Congress.
set the record straight, because we've been talking a lot about statistics, the NYPD's own data has shown that shootings are down in the first quarter. 19%. Homicides are down 9%.
Okay, Mr. Kessler, my question for you. You've been talking a lot about trafficking and, I'm going to be talking about child trafficking, human trafficking, drug trafficking on the border, and cartels actually doing what this gun violence associated with them. Can we find common ground on that?
Let me try to.
I mean, is cartel not a problem? Can you tell me the trafficking of guns done by Mexican cartels that now is subsidized with taxpayers' money? Is it not a problem? Can we find a common ground on that?
Perhaps if I.
But let's talk about that. I mean, why cannot we talk about that?
If I could just have 30 seconds to
Okay.
answer.
Well, I don't have 30 seconds, but.
Back in the Wayback Machine, I helped with Chuck Schumer, worked on the 1994 crime bill, which I know not everybody loves, but one of the things about that crime, it was huge, it was comprehensive, it was one of the things that brought down crime in this country, but one of the most important things about that crime bill, Schumer gets a lot of credit for it, Henry Hyde, the Republican ranking member, worked on it closely with Schumer too. It was a bipartisan effort, and solutions was taken from both sides.
But let's talk
wasn't
about
perfect,
it. But
the
we right now not do it.
crime rate started
My
going
time
down.
is
It was-
expired, but we need to stop playing politics with people's life. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentlelady from Indiana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Unfortunately, all this hearing turned in political debates, but we do have a real problem at the border. As someone who actually lived in communist country under totalitarian regime, someone who came here as a legal immigrant and has an enormous amount of friends who actually escape this dictatorship, I am very disappointed that we cannot have a healthy conversation. And a lot of my friends, a lot of people in my district, like people from Nicaragua, are telling me, Victoria, what can we do? We have legitimate people in life and death situation that cannot come this country legally. We have some Ukrainian refugees that they have to go through the border illegally because they cannot get here legally. And if somebody is coming from totalitarian regime from Russia, doesn't mean that they are actually prosecuted by Putin. We have to make sure that we tighten the processes. What this bill does, it's misrepresented here. The bill actually disincentivizes the president not enforce the law for legal people that want to come to this country, contribute to our country, who love freedoms to actually come into this country. Because it says we need to find the processes, we need to tighten the processes to help legitimate people. And if you cannot figure out, then you have to shut down the border. And that is the last resort. And we need to push on president to start doing this and not to wait till last resort, because what's happening in the country, it's insanity. We do not know who is coming into the country, and this is danger, national security danger. We have human drug trafficking, child trafficking, and women trafficking, enriching cartels, and we're not fighting that and let Mexico to get away with that. Now in cahoots with China, harassing our farmers, not enforcing law. We do nothing about it. But then we have, people that actually have legally want to come here and want to do and be what made this beauty of this country, what brought to all of the people that love this freedoms. We're not able to actually process that. They have to wait for years. It's happened the same with Afghanistan. We abandoned some allies and people that tried to help our country and brought some people with challenges. We didn't even go through the proper system, and now we're not dealing with that. I think our legal system is so broken. And this is not politics. This is a people's life. It's a life and death situation, because lawlessness can hurt people within our country, and also us not be able to help people with legitimate claims. It can have them die. And we're still talking politics. We're not running in a presidential election here. We, as an independent branch, have to oversee our presidents, regardless who they are, Republican and Democrats, and call them out if they're not enforcing the law. And we need to tighten the law, that it doesn't allow president to abuse the law, to abuse intent in the law. So what this bill does is tighten the law to make sure that it's not abused and actually serves with the people. And we have to put some ways enforcement mechanism for president to say, you know what, if you cannot figure it out what to do, then you will not be able to do these processes. So it disincentivizes and deter our executive branch to be dysfunctional and not doing what they're doing. I truly believe we don't have enough enforcement mechanism, to actually do the right thing and do the things that legally, it's becoming impossible to do anything legal in this country. This is like mob rule. This is like lawlessness. We're becoming a country where we have bandits running the show in our cities. I think this is awful for the people. And then we want to take rights from law-abiding citizens. This is insanity. This is what dictators do. That's what they try to do, to centralize power. And I truly believe this institution should have a capacity on a bipartisan basis to agree how we can improve some of these processes. Not try to politics because we play in politics with people's lives. And this is not just life, it's a life and death situation. This is a real serious issue that we're not willing to address. How we can secure the border, improve the processes, and benefit our national interests. We will help a lot of great people to contribute to our country. And I'm sick and tired of all of these worthless debates about voting and everything else. I hope Congress at some point will start being able to govern, and as unfortunately we're turning into real circus with the clowns here doing political messaging in these committees. It's embarrassing for me on behalf of the American people, and I hope at some point we can get together and find some common ground. I yield back.
Lady yields back. The question occurs on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from, did you want to go, Jim? The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Dettelbach, what is the core mission of your agency?
The core mission is to prevent and protect the American people from violent crime.
So do you believe that, trying to, pretty much turn millions of Americans, law-abiding citizens, into criminals just for owning a piece of plastic is really where you should put so much emphasis? Is it something you have nothing else to do?
I don't want to repeat the answers I've given because I know you have limited time, but no, I don't believe that.
Big priority for your agency?
And I don't believe that's what we are doing. We are effectuating, Congress passes a law.
Well, that's what you're doing in the fact, that's what you're trying to do. But I yield my time to Mr. Massey of Kentucky.
Thank the gentlelady from Indiana. Mr. Dettelbach, you were asked a question by a Democrat earlier about statistics on the defensive use of firearms. Are you aware that CDC used to track that and that they've removed it from their website?
I'm not aware of all the CDC things that they tracked. I know at one point there were prohibitions on them publishing data. I do not know what that situation is.
At one time, the CDC tracked the defensive use of firearms, and after officials were lobbied by activist gun control organizations, they removed that data. I think it'd be helpful to have that data. Let me ask another question very quickly. The regulatory impact assessment on page 18, your agency says you considered the numbers, the impact, and to look at the number of people impacted, their amount of dollars, you considered from 2013 to 2020. Why did you not consider 2020, 2021, and 2022 in the regulatory impact assessment?
Of what? Are you talking about?
I'm sorry, on the pistol braces, the number of pistol braces.
So I don't have it in front of me. I know that the notice of proposed rulemaking came out before I came on, and I think it was sometime in 2021. I don't know when data was referred, but I do know that there is significant information in that APA record and in the public document that is not consistent with some of the numbers that people have said here today about how many individuals are impacted.
It's because, yes, the RA understates greatly the impact of this because you didn't consider the most recent numbers of production. In the millions, you left off millions of them. A quick question about a couple other topics here. The bump stock regulation was in response to a shooting in Las Vegas. Do you have any information at all that might lead you to believe there were actually NFA weapons in Las Vegas? In other words, guns that have been converted to machine gun fire or unregistered machine guns in addition or instead of the bump stocks?
I am not privy to the details of the investigation, so I do not have any information about the details of that.
Who's in possession of those firearms?
I don't know who's in possession of those firearms.
We'd like to know that. Also, I see that you're cooperating with the FBI, the ATF is, on the January 6th pipe bomb investigation. What can you tell us about how that's going?
Obviously, that's a significant matter. It is an ongoing criminal investigation, and so I'm not going to comment on an ongoing criminal investigation.
Were those pipe bombs operable?
Again,
The ATF is the expert.
Again, it's an ongoing criminal investigation, and under longstanding policy, I cannot comment.
And we've just had a whole committee for 2 years that investigated ongoing investigations, so I'm not accepting that answer from you. We need to know these things. Do you know how the pipe bomb was discovered at the DNC? We've been told how it was discovered at the RNC, and according to a press release from the FBI, you're working with them on this investigation.
Respectfully, I understand your disagreement, but I cannot comment because it is an ongoing criminal investigation.
Well, I think you can comment. Can you tell me, in the time that we have remaining, why a national firearms registry is not only against the law, but also extremely problematic for law-abiding Americans?
The reason that a national firearms registry is against the law is because Congress has passed a provision prohibiting ATF from having a national firearms registry. It's against the law, in short, because Congress has determined it's against the law, and we will do and need to continue to follow that law because Congress makes those decisions.
If you require millions of gun owners to register firearms simply because they have a piece of plastic, are you circumventing this congressional law against a registry of firearms?
The National Firearms Act provides for a different registry, has since 1934. Something like 50 Congresses have sat between now and then and have not changed that.
Well, let me just clarify. You've swept millions of firearms into that registry without an act of Congress, and my time has expired.
Only yield just 10 seconds for unanimous consent.
Yes, I yield.
In the vein of reining in these agencies that are, I think, in so many ways out of control, I would ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter that I sent today to the IRS Commissioner, Mr. Warfall, regarding the situation of an FBI agent knocking on Mr. Taibbi, a journalist's door, IRS, yeah, excuse me. I would ask unanimous consent to enter that record and letter into the record. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Excuse me, without objection?
Without objection.
So ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Busy handing it to you, Mr. Rankin. Gentle ladies recognized, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually want to concur with gentle lady from Wyoming that actually EPA probably is the most abusive agencies, and actually Supreme Court ruled last year on their complete overreach of their power and authority delegated on the Clean Air Act, and what they're doing with Clean Water Act is actually, I would argue that trying to take private property rights by the government, private property abusing the power of the government, and when governments try to take your private property, this is actually a communism by Karl Marx. It's not even socialism, and it's very dangerous, and I'll be honest with you, look at the P&Ls and financials of all large corporations and all these big funds like BlackRock. They're doing just fine with all of the regulations that my Democrat colleagues issued. They're making a lot of money. But who is getting hurt is the little guy, that farmer or some business owner that cannot afford to hire lawyers and CPA for $1,000 an hour, that cannot afford to go and lobby to every government level and sitting in the offices and trying to make their case. That's who's getting screwed. And we now have a situation now where all of the so-called dark money doing just fine, but the little guy has no ability now to be able to start a business and be able to compete and have abilities to make money. I think this is a very dangerous situation where we're now concentrating the power close to the government, close to Washington, D.C., and giving the power to the bureaucracies that people have no ability to even have an input. I mean, this is crazy, and this is very dangerous for our country. And I will tell you, I mean, EPA is so creative. They do the suicidal gimmicks, to try to violate even Administrative Procedures Act. They're doing all these definitions, They use and they pay people to come into committees and lobby on something that doesn't help the people. But in reality, what's happening with all of these environmental regulations that we put? Because when they're unfeasible, what's happened right now? That we're killing, destroying businesses in our country, and companies like BlackRock are part of it. They're given a lot of power. They don't have to follow the rules. But what's happening? We're burning coal from China. We're helping Russia to make a lot of money, and American companies are getting screwed. And our pollution has net effect higher than that was before. Because when we push our companies to do business in lawless and corrupt countries and dictatorship, they collude in the same environment. We don't build the walls, from China or anywhere else. In the same ocean, and all pollution goes. Instead of have reasonable laws, the representative of the people and the businesses here, and help our people and our companies and our Americans to succeed. So this is just dumb. And if you think about it, some of these funds, that wasn't this, climate change agenda of BlackRock, like British funds, that actually, there are some activists that are honest and actually respect if someone is honest, and not hypocrite. If you want to drive everyone a bike and you're driving a bike, I respect you. But if you're flying big jet fuel jets and you want me to ride a bike, well, screw you. You're not going to tell me what to do. This is wrong. You have no power to do that. And these big companies have no right to tell us what to do. And I think we as legislators need to think about it, who we're representing, because these agencies do not represent with the people. They represent big special interest group. People rotate between them. They get in jobs and lobbying and careers and all of these different companies, and they're promulgating these rules to benefit large special interest groups. And now they are becoming so powerful that everyone is afraid to challenge them. And I think if we are not going to go back and think, what are we doing here? We're going to destroy our country, how it is known and how it was set up. And it is very, very dangerous. So our branch has to get our act together and start doing our job and not be afraid of administrative state, not be afraid of large corporation and big money that coming from all directions, but we actually remember that this republic is set up in being the greatest republic in the history of the world for only reasons. There is no difference between the people, because the people have the most power and freedoms. And if we take these freedoms away from we the people, we're going to unfortunately abandon and betray all the people who die for our freedoms. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentlelady from Indiana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually think it's a very good amendment, because it's even worse. The guidance is even worse, than everything else, because it costs so much money. And think about agencies like FDA. They issue this guidance, then reissue the guidance. It costs billions of dollars, of companies that are doing research. It creates unpredictability. And it costs taxpayers at the end, because it passed on to us as a consumer, but also it's stolen innovation. And this guidance has no clear rule how it's issued, no ability to input. It's terrible. The same happened in the Department of Energy with all of the different things that guidance seems to do for different nuclear plants. I mean, this stuff is so important, for us to be able to have the predictable set of rules, and there's rules that express actually the will of Congress and the will of the people. So this is an amendment that actually probably make this bill even more important, because guidance is really something that agencies shouldn't even be able to do, but they put such enforcement mechanism on this guidance that it's actually cost so much for the economy, for the taxpayer, but also to people's lives in some industry, because sometimes it's life and death situation. And when we stall some of these innovative, drugs that may save people's lives, we actually, we might be able to not save some people. So this is a significantly important issue, and I appreciate the gentleman bringing this amendment. I hope this committee will support it. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentlelady from Wyoming is recognized.
I want to thank the congressman from Arizona for bringing what is an extremely important amendment to the Reins Act. I'm just going to give an example of how guidance is used by the federal regulatory agencies to circumvent the APA and the rights of the American public. In 2019, the USDA issued a 2-page fact sheet that they posted to the USDA's website that required all livestock producers in the United States, all cattle and bison producers, to start using RFID, radio frequency identification ear tags, by January 1, 2023, or they would be prohibited from being able to sell their cattle across state lines. This obviously would have a huge impact on a state like Wyoming, which is a large cattle producer, but we don't have packing plants in the state of Wyoming, so all of our cattle is shipped out of state. This was a 2-page fact sheet issued on a website without notice, no comment period. According to the USDA, the price tag of this requirement to the cattle and bison industries would have been $2 billion. That's how these administrative agencies use and abuse guidance, and it absolutely should be included within this bill, within the Reins Act. I again appreciate the inclusion of the word guidance. This is another area where Congress has got to oversee what these agencies are doing and prevent them from being able to abuse their power in the way that they have repeatedly in the past. With that, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Question occurs on the gentleman from Arizona's amendment.
Mr. Chairman, on the assurance that this is going to be taken up in the Rules Committee, I will withdraw.
Gentleman withdraws his amendment. Question. Gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized. You have an amendment?
Yes, thank you. I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Oh, okay, you have the
Is there a
one?
point of order?
So,
We're waiting on the amendment, and
thank you.
maybe we'll stand in recess while we get the amendment. Hey, we're fine.
Children's. Yeah. Yeah. Children's.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 277 offered by Ms. Scanlon of Pennsylvania.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read. The gentlelady from Pennsylvania, the gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized. The gentleman from Arizona has a point of order.
Thank you. So my amendment would make sure that federal agencies would, under this Reins Act, would still be able to issue rules to lower the incidence of childhood cancer, asthma, and premature mortality. 1 in 4 children in my region have childhood asthma, largely as a result of environmental factors. And that's why, among other things, the effort to repeal the truck emissions regulations that's occurring this week is so concerning, because that's one of the contributing factors. We also have really important research and treatment facilities, whether Children's Hospital or St. Christopher's Hospital, that provide research and data and innovative treatments to children in our region. But there's a lot going on in this region. We need the support of the federal regulators to be able to push that research forward to make sure that we're protecting the kids in our region. So, we hope our committee can agree here that it's important to protect kids from pollution, from dangerous products, to be able to push forward the promising new medications that they may be able to take. So, if we're going to gum up the rulemaking process with these burdensome procedural rules, can we at least make sure that we protect children's health? I'd yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. Who seeks recognition? Gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Well, I'm not sure, I think I know what the amendment's trying to do. But was this something that was offered under a previous piece of legislation that may have been drafted in a way that would accomplish what the amendment tries to do right now? I'm not sure if my colleague had tried to tackle this issue last Congress when they were in control. I think it goes back to the bigger piece and the full bill, which is, I've seen the Reins Act and I've seen it work. And the problem oftentimes can be that even the lawmaker, the legislator, really doesn't do the work up front. They don't draft the legislation in a way that could be clear and all-inclusive and kind of either lays a path for those agencies that may end up doing the rulemaking and being able to, and what the Reins Act would do is it allows you to put in place some type of scope statement that would actually then go back to the legislature so they could take a look at it and say, this does meet the legislative intent.
Would the gentleman yield?
This meets the legislative intent. And if everyone then is on the same page, fine, then move forward with the legislation and ultimately it may pass both houses and be signed into law. But, you know, I don't think we look kind of in the mirror on some of this stuff, on some of these bills and say, did you do a good job when you drafted it in the first place?
Would the gentleman
and I think
yield?
that's part of this conversation, so.
Would the gentleman yield for a
No,
moment?
I won't yield. I think the other thing would be, you know, you can have a fiscal trigger too, right? It may not apply to every piece of legislation that makes its way through the body, through either the House or the Senate. But that's the way it works in some states, and they've had great success. I mean, I think one of the things that's most troubling about what I've been hearing today is that there are a group, some elected officials, I've seen it before, who cozy up to the bureaucracy. They believe that the answers are all within the bureaucracy, so they cozy up to it. They say, without the bureaucracy, this will not work. And I think that's the opposite view that I take, and I hope that many other elected officials take, is that you should be a skeptic. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't good people in the bureaucracy and people with expertise and people that we rely on a regular basis when there's a very technical type of legislation, piece of legislation. But, you know, to cozy up to them, that's not your job. That's not why you were elected, to become complicit with the bureaucracy. You're here to work with your colleagues to draft legislation and make sure that what you drafted is ultimately met with the same goals that the rulemaking is drawn up on. And if we don't have that second kick at the cat, if we don't have that second opportunity to kind of dig into this and say, does this meet kind of the goals that we ultimately set as a legislative body, I don't think we're doing our job. So with that, I think that, you know, my colleague, well-intentioned, I think, in trying to somehow address a very specific issue that obviously would pull at the heartstrings of anybody, may be well-intentioned, but again, I think the overall goal here is to come up with a piece of legislation that holds the bureaucracy accountable. And that's why I think the Reins Act, it's working in states all over this nation. It works great. It really is. It's a piece of legislation that's been drafted and run through many state houses, and it works very well at that level. So that's why I think the bill's a good idea, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of the amendment offered by my colleague from Pennsylvania. I'm proud of her for putting this together. I'm proud of her for taking a look at what we're talking about here, the absurdity of what this underlying bill would do and the harm it will cause to the health and safety of all Americans if we go through this ridiculous proposal by the other side around rulemaking, substituting our thoughts on any of these issues: clean air, clean water, safety of transportation, safety of flight, EPA regulations, and the like, and putting that within non-expert hands. We have experts who are doing cutting-edge research on all kinds of areas, and specific to this amendment, research on the health and safety of our children, the well-being of our children. So I rise in support of this. I don't understand how anybody could not support and be a yes on this amendment, offering an exception for the health and safety of our children. And with that, I yield to my colleague, the author of the amendment from Pennsylvania.
Thank you. And if the gentleman had been willing to yield, I wanted to express that, I understand his concern about legislation that is drafted without sufficient input when people aren't given the opportunity to help make a bill better, as we've been seeing repeatedly throughout this Congress, so that there are gaps in what is sent to the floor, what is sent to the agencies. But instead of trying to block agency action that might fill in some of these gaps appropriately, this bill would block agency action and force things back to Congress rather than forcing Congress to do the job right in the first time. So I share the congressman's concern about Congress legislating well in the first instance, but hamstringing the entire federal government when Congress is not doing its best work, I think punishes all of America, and I don't think that's the appropriate response. So I yield back to my colleague, Ms. Dean.
And I yield the remainder of my time. Thank you.
The gentle ladies from Pennsylvania yield back. The gentle lady from Indiana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I put it kind of few things. I have kept listening to this debate. First of all, I think it's absurdity to think that somehow the people that sit in these offices in Washington, D.C., that a lot of this agency that never had a job, in the real world, they know better than the American people on the ground and actually doing the work. And the only input that you American people do have that actually through us, through legislative branch. So this actually, our responsibility and duty to do that. And I think this bill doesn't do anything except it just says, we have a big overreach right now by administrative state. And we as in Congress needs to do our job. And maybe some people don't like it. Well, you know what? You don't have to run for office if you don't want to do your job. But if you ran for this office to represent these people, you should not be afraid to spend some time legislating, creating policies that represent the people. And to tell you the truth, sometimes actually it does disservice because regulations, it is a long process and goes through a lot of drama. If something is very good and something is real important for children or fight cancer or something, actually Congress has a good ability maybe to do it faster, because if we can agree and have consensus, we can put bills on suspension and pass so quickly if it's good for the people. So actually agencies and bureaucracy are stalling a lot of innovation that would be so good for the Americans. And that is the biggest problem we are facing right now. It's expensive. A lot of people cannot even bring innovation because you have to hire so many so-called attorneys and PhD and experts that charge a bunch of fees that a lot of them have no idea what's going on in the real world. But if you don't have a lot of money to bring your innovation or invention, if you're not able to do it, if you're a startup company, you have no ability to do it. That's why only big companies now getting bigger. And we have, we're always fighting too large to fail. Our too large to fail is even bigger now. Like in every industry, we're getting such oligopolies everywhere that we're going to be in trouble soon because they have controlled so much of the market. So I think it's actually very positive would be for us and for innovation and for children and fight a lot of diseases and everything. If Congress would do its job and actually does some of this, promulgate this legislation correctly, plus probably more on a narrow basis. We shouldn't give so much, power and broad authority to the other branch. We have to think what our laws are doing. We have to spend time things how they're implementing and adjusting them. That is part of effective legislative process. We also need to think what federal government should be doing and what states and locals should be doing, because unfortunately, federal government somehow thinks we're so superior here to everyone else. We're accumulating so much power that our core functions, the protecting constitutional rights, securing our border, having strong military and national defense, we're not doing the greatest job on that because we're stretched too thin. We're doing a lot of things that states are closer to the people. It would be much more effective doing that. And I think Congress maybe start thinking, oh my gosh, I have to vote on this, all these things. Maybe that is not a job that we should be even doing here. And we're overreaching what we're doing as a branch. And I think that will make us think twice in the legislators here. So I think it's a very good legislation. It's unfortunate that we cannot come to bipartisan consensus. And we should be able to oversee the other branch regardless who's in charge, Democrat or Republican. It should not matter. We are co-equal branch of government, and actually probably the most powerful from co-equal, because we have power of the purse and power of the war, and founding fathers wanted us to be like that. So when we are not doing our job, we're doing disservice to this republic and to the American people, and I think we need to think about that. So all this bill does, it tells Congress, don't subrogate your powers, do your job, legislate for people, and let the American people have an input. It doesn't matter, because this is a country that it doesn't matter where you're born, rich or poor, where you came from, it doesn't matter. Your rights are equally protected. And constitutional republic is very important, where you don't have a tyranny of majority, but you have ability to protect rights of a minority. And that is the most important function we have. But if we allow other branch to legislate on our behalf and promulgate laws on our behalf and decide about people's rights, we are betraying our republic and our constitutional values. So hopefully we could have a consensus. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Who seeks recognition? Gentleman, let's go first to Mr. Gentleman from Arizona, too.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So
I need you first to withdraw your point of.
I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Scanlon. I recognize Ms. Spartz from Indiana for questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. It's my honor to be here with fellow farmers. I said I've been involved in a lot of businesses, but this is one of the toughest ones when you depend on government and God. So I appreciate being here, also my fellow Hoosier. We've seen that food security is also national security issues, especially during COVID times, and we see what the power oligopolies have right now in many parts of the market, but including food processing. We're creating oligarchs, cartels, and with some actually child labor issues, including the state of Indiana, which raises very significant concerns. So I appreciate Mr. Chairman having this hearing. And before I came here, since I'm not involved in livestock, I do soybean farming, I actually met with farmers in my district, to get their input. And I wanted to run something by you. I think, Prime Act, it's a great legislation. I'm surprised that we're even dealing with intrastate commerce. I don't know how Congress gets involved into everything, but just one issue they brought up to me was interstate commerce too, where they say we have this one-size-fits-all approach where federal government, centralizing a lot of regulations, but states and businesses have liabilities. If you're not going to follow good, safety laws, you will not be in business for very long. The same states, they have agriculture as a big part of GDP of states. They have an interest, to have good production and good standards, but, there is some flexibility, and like some regulations, Indiana Department of Environmental Management has quite more stringent even the federal government, so you actually can apply to local markets. So one thing that they brought up, to give more flexibilities for states to do inspection with also state inspectors, not maybe this large, huge processes would be dealing, with, just USDA inspectors, but states can develop, standards within the state to deal with smaller processes where it would be more competition, and bring, ability for actually this mid-sized companies to survive, because they cannot hire expensive attorneys and scientists and everything else, but they might not need it because they don't have that large type of mechanic processes that maybe some other ones. So I think, Mr. Trott, I wanted, since you are representing organization of state legislators, I used to be a member of, and actually got an Iron Lady award from them, but I wanted to get your thoughts on actually maybe doing more flexibility in the Farm Bill for states to have ability to do these inspections for interstate commerce too.
Yeah, so for commerce within a state, it's an intrastate commerce question, not an interstate commerce question. The federal government definitely has jurisdiction on interstate commerce, but at the end of the day, this is a federalism question. Does the authority lie with the federal government or does it lie with the state government? And if we're talking about commerce within its own borders, inspection within its own borders for things that only stay in their own borders, that's clearly a state authority that's been subsumed by the federal government. And it's something that Congress has the ability to go ahead and delegate back to the states, and it's
Sure, they will ask about delegated back, but what about interstate commerce? To have more flexibility for in-state inspectors also to do some inspection maybe for smaller plants, you know, for interstate commerce also, because we don't have to regulate everything, and we can set baseline, but we don't have to one-size-fits-all approaches because states are so unique in agriculture.
Yeah, states are the laboratories of democracy. We have 50 different opportunities in this great nation to go ahead and figure out what works, but you have to enable states to be able to do this without doing a one-size-fits-all. And right now, what we have is a one-size-fits-all system, the same thing that goes through these vertically integrated multinational conglomerates, as what happens with, you know, the small producers that are here at the table with me.
Maybe Mr. Sullivan, if you can briefly, each of our presenters, just get your thoughts on that too. Mr. Salatin?
Yeah, so the germination tray for innovation is embryonic prototypes. You cannot have solutions to problems without prototype innovation. You don't start big, you start small. And so one of the problems we have right now is that with this overarching federal domination of state choice, all right, if a state, for example, Maine, when they did their food sovereignty law, they said in Maine, if a farmer and a consumer want to work together, we're not going to get a bureaucrat involved. That's fine. Somebody at church, you know, you want to sell, we're not going to get involved. As soon as they passed the law, here came federal in and said, if you do that, we're going to withdraw all inspection from the state. Maine won't be able to sell anything to anybody out of the state. And so immediately Maine caved and it was gone. So this body right here has the chance to offer innovative experimentation opportunities for our 50-state experiment. We hear safety. Oh, people are going to get sick if we have uninspected food. We don't know that. Maybe they'll actually be able to afford better food. It'll be more available, and their food system will be more secure. But until this body grants freedom to try, to create a germination tray of innovative ideology, we don't know if we'd have more people, or maybe we'd have healthier people because they wouldn't be condemned to the oligarchy. Maybe that would be the outcome.
Thank you. I think my time has expired. I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Spartz. I now recognize Mr. Ivey for his questions.
Recognize the gentlelady from Indiana to explain the amendment.
This amendment is just a simple amendment. It includes a minor alteration to improve the text and reduce possible confusion. It's not intended in any way to alter the important purpose of this bill. So I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Who seeks recognition? Gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The suits at issue here are lawsuits where a plaintiff sues a government agency because the agency missed a statutory deadline to review and revise a rule, or because an agency failed to take statutorily required actions. In these cases, in these kinds of cases, it is very unlikely that the government would win the case, so the agency settles and it agrees to take the action or promulgate the rule that it was already legally obligated to do. And that's just common sense. Moreover, many of the agency's duties concern public health and safety. Congress imposed these duties on agencies and authorized citizen lawsuits to enforce them precisely because we want agencies to pass rules that protect the public welfare and keep us safe. This bill would prevent that. H.R. 3446, the so-called Sunshine Bill, would slow down the rulemaking process by creating a gauntlet of burdensome and time-consuming procedures before allowing an agency to settle. Hypothetically, under this bill, if the regulatory action at issue involved the Clean Air Act, anyone who breathes air or any affected corporation would have a rebuttable right to intervene in a consent decree or settlement agreement. Then, between the bill's forced mediation provision, new notice and comment period for proposed settlements and other onerous and unnecessary requirements, agency rulemaking would be slowed even further. This bill opens the door wide to dilatory tactics by corporations, and it would force expensive and time-consuming litigation at taxpayer expense. Indeed, the Congressional Budget Office noted that a previous version of H.R. 3446 would impose millions of dollars in additional cost on taxpayers. Furthermore, H.R. 3446 subverts the federal rules of civil procedure and the longstanding practice of judicial discretion. Under the federal rules, the courts are empowered to manage litigation and to consider equities in their decision-making, yet this bill would strip judges of that authority. And for these reasons, I strongly oppose the bill, and I urge my colleagues to do the same, and with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Who seeks recognition? Gentlelady from Indiana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to clarify a few things because I don't think this is exactly what the bill is doing, because it doesn't prevent from anything. All it does, it just brings more clarity and transparency to make sure that the processes that happen in the agencies are aligned with Administration Procedures Act. And if there are some new deadlines, there is a transparency that there is public is aware, and if there are some different change in priorities, that we are not shortchanging some other priorities that agencies should be working on. So it's not narrow focus, but have a broader scope of issues that are in front, because there are different things that could be in front of the agency, have more urgency, and then the resources are properly allocated and not guided by judges who shouldn't be really deciding, what policies that agencies should prioritize. So I agree with you. There is a lot of frustration, with agencies not enforcing the laws properly in a lot of areas. And I think this is the job of Congress, and we need to do our job, not job of judicial branch to make decisions for us. Otherwise, only large special interest group have ability of input, and we as elected representatives should have an ability to input. As related to mediation's concern, this is actually just given a second opinion to make sure that there is no requirements, for judge to really follow. This is not no mandatory mediation decisions are done. So to have a second opinion, second thoughts with fresh eyes, because sometimes they're very important cases, and it's important to have a second set of eyes. As related to the public notices, I think it says that there should be public notice response, but it doesn't say specific substantive response, but make sure that there is an acknowledgement that the public notice was taken into consideration, and ultimately doesn't require that specific request. So I think this bill, all it does, if we're going to go through these processes that agencies have to address, make sure that they align with the intent of the Congress and also with the policies that in front of that specific agencies and priorities, because it shouldn't be up to judges and judicial branch to create laws for us. An enforcement mechanism, unfortunately, is broken in our institution. We should be the one that's saying, okay, if this agency is not enforcing the laws and not meeting deadlines, maybe we shouldn't be funding these programs. Maybe we should be sitting here and reviewing that. That is our job. We are not even passing meaningful budget. Over 90% of spending in our country is not authorized. So we should be the one who are accountable for it, not just to have making deals that are not transparent. So this is the bare minimum, at least brings transparency to make sure if we have bad apples that want to abuse the system, and like a lot of people move around in Washington, D.C. Today they work in agency, tomorrow they work at some lobbying group, a law firm. We need to make sure that deals are not cut, and it happens a lot. And in a lot of interest, it happens a lot. So we need to make sure that there is a way for the public to have an input. So I don't think this bill actually does anything even to address, because this actually, some states were looking at these practices, this shouldn't be allowed at all. So it's not doing that. It's not in addressing that issue. It's not saying that, you know, maybe there is a legitimate reasons. I think maybe we should use a lot more of these reasons, you know, for public to be able to have some enforcement, like, you know, our border security, other things. Citizens maybe should also have this option, you know, options on these issues too. So, but ultimately make sure that it's not overstepping the given authority of Congress, and make sure that the judicial system doesn't go beyond what they're prescribed to do to interpret the laws and decision, and not to create new laws, which happening more and more often. So I think it's a separation of power, but also proper representation by Congress. And if Congress is not doing its job, then it's probably should people pay attention to what we are doing, but it shouldn't be resolved within few group of special interest group with big money that have an ability to bring lawsuits and try to make their agenda be prioritized, maybe, you know, hurting some other important issues that any agency should be working on. And I think this is a very good legislation, and I am disappointed that we cannot have transparency supported and public notice on a bipartisan basis. You know, this is a good bill, and I hope my Democrat colleagues will reconsider to support this bill. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Who seeks recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Gentleman from Georgia is recognized. The clerk will report the amendment. Gentleman from California reserves a point of order.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 3446, offered by Mr. Johnson of Georgia.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment would exempt from the Sunshine Act any consent decree or settlement agreement that prevents or is intended to prevent discrimination based on race, religion, national origin, or any other protected category. As I've said, these are cases where the agency already has a statutory duty to promulgate the rules. Yet, H.R. 3446 would grind the rulemaking process to a halt with nearly unlimited interveners, forced mediation processes, a new notice and comment period for proposed settlements, and other onerous and totally unnecessary requirements. Surely, we must all agree that we cannot delay rules to prevent discrimination based on race, religion, or national origin. It is too crucial to our fabric of our country. Just last week, the Supreme Court upheld a section of the Voting Rights Act that prohibits maps from being drawn to dilute minority voting strength. If states can go back and draw entirely new district maps to ensure that we are not discriminating based on race, I'm sure we can agree to remove barriers and hurdles from settlements that would prevent discrimination based on legally protected categories. I strongly urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California withdraws his point of order. The gentlelady from Indiana is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I oppose this amendment because it's really not necessary. It creates not necessary. I mean, our agency shouldn't be discriminated on these issues already, so it just brings a different language that is not really needed for this bill, and this exception is not needed, because I hope the agency do consider and care issues like that, because this is within their duty. And if somebody is discriminated, it's a serious offense. So I don't expect agencies to do it. So I think it just brings issues to the bills that is not really needed to be here, and just bring, you know, application of this policy somehow start separating it from really uniformly properly applied. So I think this is already covered in other type of statutes, and this bill as it is, it's a good legislation to bring transparency, and we don't need any specific carve-outs and reasons to have this amendment. So I would appreciate if my colleagues oppose this amendment.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you.
Lady from Indiana is recognized.
Mr. Dolan, I will quote excerpts from your report describing the FBI actions in Trump's case. You call them sobering, I call them alarming. Rapid opening made no sense, no sound reason, no explanation, difficult to explain, no follow-up, uncorroborated evidence, unevaluated information, rumors and speculations, thin intelligent, exculpatory statements were not included, misrepresentation of the recorded conversation, noticeable departure, not using typical tools, serious lack of rigor, choose to ignore red flags, unwarranted delay, ignore nearly all recommendations, didn't disclose intelligence, not inform of inconsistencies, did not give appropriate attention to facts, did not adequately examine, did not receive satisfactory explanation, was not informed, never corrected assertion, never advised, never been apprised, never gave appropriate consideration, no further action, failed to make known, failed to act, failed to follow logical leads, failed to interview, failed to revise the paperwork, failed to take even the basic steps, failed to determine, failed to provide, failed to integrate, failed to fully exploit the materials, failed to critically analyze information, failed to properly consider, failed to correct errors, ignored contrary evidence, was never brought to the attention, intentionally falsified in material documents, fabricated the allegation, omission of material fact, numerous significant defects, 17 material errors and omissions, inaccurate representation, deliberately shut down, told not to write and provide findings orally, incorrectly noted, missed another opportunity, omitted email, omitted information, did not corroborate, never sought to obtain records, resisted efforts, conflicting recollection, troubling failure of recollection, not in a single FBI employee, curious change in assessment, key players declined to be interviewed, lacked sufficient probable cause, frustration on the part of investigators, sense of betrayal, highly unusual instruction, director was really shocking, and the list goes on. Dolan, with extensive connection to the Democrat Party and access to senior Russian officials and Putin's think tank, was never interviewed, request was denied, case was never opened, Audin instructing to cease all research and analysis related to Dolan. Leadership directed to dedicate no resources to Dolan. FBI interviewed hundreds of individuals, yet they did not interview Dolan. Danchenko failed to properly consider prior Russian counter-espionage case. FBI's validation unit raised serious concern. Management ignored and resisted nearly all recommendations and supported continued payment to him. Jonathan Weiner, special envoy to Secretary Kerry to Libya, who worked as lobbyist for Russian oligarch Deripaska with ties to Putin, disseminated still dossier to the U.S. official and destroyed his records. Deripaska was allowed to buy, control, and package in uranium company with extensive mining projects in the United States, approved by Secretary Clinton's State Department in 2010. The former head of the FBI's counterintelligence division in New York, McGonigal, involved with this case, recently was accused of taking money from Deripaska. Clinton case from your report stands in stark contrast. Lack of action, considerable caution, never open inquiry, in limbo, linger, defensive brief, and corroborating information, no effort to investigate cease and desist due to the undisclosed concern, decline to issue subpoenas. You're concerned with FBI's reputational harm. But it appears to me, using Director's Clapper's lexicon, this case has all classic earmarks of collusion and cover-up. However, not one person went to jail, and Clinton campaign operatives like Jake Sullivan now have the highest national security position in our government, who's actually driving a very slow response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Do you believe that justice has been served?
I can speak to what my team and I did, which was to try
Just tell me yes or no. Do you believe has been served?
We tried to serve justice to the best of our ability.
Okay.
I can speak on that.
You also state Russian intelligence knew of still election investigation for the Clinton campaign before Crossfire Hurricane was opened, and still sub-sources could have been compromised by Russian. However, FBI have not appropriately considered to the possibility that the still reports was Russian disinformation. Is that correct?
If we're talking about Mr. Danchenko?
No, just you said, and this is in your report, you say that Russia, FBI never considered the possibility that still reports was Russian disinformation in full on part. Is that correct? That they did. Do you know why?
I don't know why, but I think that's correct.
Another question. CHS-1 FBI spy, and I'm assuming Stephen Halper, invited Page at the request of the FBI to conference in UK, created Manafort-Page conspiracy allegation in direct conflict with his recordings. FBI never fully transcribed recording, misstated the Crossfire Hurricane's significant improper fact on Page session conversation. He didn't show up with subpoena and wasn't caught in very shady case in 1980s. In your report, you were able to establish that CHS intentionally lied to the FBI. You were not able to establish why and what you did.
Okay, I'm not sure.
CHS-1.
I'm sorry?
CHS-1, you said that you were not able to establish that CHS-1 intentionally lied to the FBI. What did you do and what didn't do to establish it and not able to establish?
Let me see. This is on page 89.
the gentlelady's time has expired. We'll let the witness answer. I think she's referring to confidential human source number 1, Mr.
Yeah,
Durham.
you said you were unable to establish it at the end of your report. I think it's at the end. This is on page 243.
243,
Yep.
okay. So the context of that is in the Steele reporting, one of the pieces of information that had been used in the dossiers was that Mr. Page allegedly
But
had...
what, did you interview him? What did you do to establish?
We got to move quickly.
Mr.
The
Chairman,
gentlelady's time has expired. We'll let the witness answer the question. We are going to have to stick closer to the 5-minute rule because they're holding votes on the floor until we finish today's business.
Okay, so I can...
You can answer real quick, sure.
So one of the things in the Steele report was that Carter Page allegedly had met with 2 sanctioned Russians when he was in Moscow in July. We were able to establish that that was not the truth. I mean, you look at the evidence that that's not true, and the FBI should have been able to detect that, and they didn't detect it. But that was a meeting that supposedly occurred in July of 2016, or meetings, one of them with Mr. Sechin. Later, when the FBI had opened Crossfire Hurricane, and in December of 2016, CHS-1 met with Mr. Page, again, recorded a conversation with Mr. Page. And he, several days later, told his handling agent that, I forgot to tell you that Page said that on Page's most recent trip to Russia, where he worked or had business interests, he met with Sechin. And the FBI, when you look at the communications in the FBI, they're saying, that sounds kind of screwy here, but we should look at that. They apparently never looked at that. We went and got the recording of that conversation that had occurred between CHS-1 and Mr. Page in December of 2016. And Page never said that he had met with Sechin on his most recent visit.
Mr. Chairman, the overruns, I appreciate the fact to give him a chance to answer.
You're definitely going to get asked your question. It'll be the Republicans will be squeezed. I think the gentlelady's time has expired. We'll now go to the gentlelady from. I appreciate your answer, Mr. Durham. I think we.
Mr. Chairman, Director Wray, FBI's mission is to protect the American people and uphold the U.S. Constitution, correct?
Yes.
So we had a couple years ago, it was a hearing, and I actually, looking on all of the concerns that I've seen was really warrantless surveillance and abuses of Section 702 of FISA. I compare your agency to KGB, and spending 2 years in this committee, reading a lot of reports now, doing a lot of hearings, I am really shocked that your agency is involved not just unlawful surveillance of American citizens, intimidation of American citizens, censorship of American citizens, potential cover-ups of convenient political figures, and potential setups of inconvenient political figures. And a lot of my colleagues asked a lot of questions, but I think when we look at that, and unfortunately we haven't been doing our job authorizing spending, which was not authorized by our committee already for over a decade, we're going to have this serious conversation and including reauthorization of Section 702. But I want to talk about, follow up on some other issues that you mentioned about that my colleagues I was talking about, and you mentioned that you focus on malign foreign actors. So in Durham report, which describes 2020, he states, and this is a quote, "Steele subsources could have been compromised by the Russians. FBI never gave appropriate consideration to the possibility that the Steele reports was Russian disinformation. No vetting happened. You have some falsified FISA court application. You have some very shady confidential human sources that you kept paying for them. Nothing was vetted. Some of your head of counterintelligence division was accused of taking money from Russian oligarchs just recently this year. So you said it all was bad. Now we go to 2022. Your agency is involved with SBU, Security Service of Ukraine, to actually provide information to big tech to censor just views of American people. No vetting seems as happening. This is information, actually a lot of this information was pro-Russian against Ukraine and pro-Putin. Your agents just pass it along. It seems like nothing happened. And it's interesting for me that, when I raised some issue, actually beginning of July, and what's happening in Ukraine, I don't have any confidential human sources, just using common sense and intelligence that something is wrong happening in Ukraine. It seems like there is a lot of infiltration. I was attacked. Oh my gosh, how can you question? Well, strangely enough, after me raising this question in the middle of July, President Zelensky fired his SBU top guy, opens over 600 investigations, is potential infiltration by Russians, and then fire a lot of other people for corruption, and anti-corruption prosecutor was suddenly installed. But what is really interesting for me, how could you have these processes, and are you doing actually any investigation to look? Because it seems to me, as I understand, you still have our agencies working with SBU, with, coming from KGB time, and FSB time has a lot of potential to have this infiltration. Are you doing any investigations on these issues?
Doing investigations on...
Yeah, to look at that, why we're doing unvetted information we're taking from SBU, which actually was infiltrated and given to censor Americans to our big tech companies. Are you looking into that as an agency?
I'm not sure there's an investigation that is directly on point to what you're saying. I mean, certainly the SBU is an agency that we have worked with for a long time.
So did we change the processes now, since we know your guys work with SBU, SBU was infiltrated by Russian, and big tech was censoring American citizens with this unvetted information that actually was provided by Russians. Do you change any processes? Or is it still happening? You have still the same processes that happen. Is it still happening now?
Well, the engagement that we had with SBU was during the...
But I'm talking right now.
Yeah.
Because recently, some of your agents had actually a joint meeting, and they were bragging how they're top cooperations with SBU. Did you change processes?
I'm not sure what processes you're talking
To
about.
vet information.
Yeah.
What's happening?
Again, during the period at the beginning of the invasion...
No, I'm talking right now.
Yeah.
Do you vet information that you get from agencies like SBU? I mean, I don't know if are we being stupid? I understand. Are we being infiltrated by Russians or corrupt? I don't understand why we're not vet information with such a really challenging agency. So are you changing anything of that? I would like to have a briefing or something on this, because if you're not looking at that, I have a huge problem with that.
I'm happy to try to see if we can arrange to get you a better briefing on the subject.
Because this is a serious national security issue. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from South Carolina. Oh, unanimous, I'm sorry. Gentlelady from Texas is recognized.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Chairman. The lone ranger on this side.
Thanks for sticking with us.
We appreciate you for a moment, and all of my members. Let me just quickly indicate that I have a document that is a tweet that is wanting to submit into the record. Two of the Republican witnesses were gifted 255,000 checks. 255,000 in checks immediately after they testified before this committee. It seems to be quid pro quo, but the fact of the tweet that I'm submitting from Mr. Kyle Serapin says the fact that Mr. Allen has not yet cashed a check is not that he did not receive the check. So I submit in the record the tweet from Mr. Serapin, who indicated that two gentlemen, Garrett and Marcus, were receiving a check of
Continuing your attack on whistleblowers without objection. Those are
just a clarification, Mr. Chairman, and then finally, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Department of Homeland Security, Strategic Intelligence Assessment and Data on Domestic Terrorism, dated October 2022, Appendix A. I mean, the document itself, Appendix A, Appendix B, and the categories of domestic violent extremism.
Without objection.
Your kindness is appreciated. Thank you very much.
The gentleman from South Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner Khan, being here. So I want to bring a few issues, and I would like you to respond. But first, I belong to a group of people, even though I very much agree with Mr. Tiffany that majority of monopoly problems which are significant because we created this monopolies, incentivized this monopoly. And unfortunately, we created more companies now, too big to fail. And all of the laws that we try to deal with them, including like Dodd-Frank Act, which I was actually one of the implementers when I work in public accounting, now created this institution even bigger. And now we're going to be dealing with that. But I also understand that there are some of the areas where we have now problems so big that it involves us to looking at the barriers of entry, like healthcare, and then looking what are we going to deal with now with these monopolies that distorting the market and using very aggressive behaviors to suppress suppress competitives and really not delivering value because they can't. They are not natural monopoly. We created, and we have to look at that. So I think your agency has an important function, but unfortunately, and I want you to really respond that we have a lot of concerns from the Republican side and that agencies been politicized and agencies been used to really the hammer and sickle and, to actually pick, a kind of in fashion to pick losers and winners. And I think, it's becoming a problem. And if you look at your even, the missions that you have and objectives, you said we will really need to have more, merge together consumer protection, competition, and you want to, your agency shapes distribution of power. I truly don't believe that that is an agency. I think the agency should be, dealing with the real abusers in the system that want to not have competition, use monopolistic power. So even in the statements, it's a problem. And I think we have one common ground that it seems like a lot of time we have a lot of talk is on healthcare. But when we come to the action, it's even recently, we put it on the table with President Biden's administration on dealing with, with site-neutral payments in hospitals that bankrupt in Medicare, total abuse of power, allow them to buy private practices, allow them to put these doctors in crazy non-competes, enslave them, building Taj Mahals, not paying taxes, invest in billions on Wall Street, and pay billions to executives by subsidies that are now countries gone bankrupt on because sort of our spending is healthcare, not delivering value, they didn't want to deal with that, and then you have a challenge now because a lot of these entities, nonprofit, which is really doesn't even have guidance, that's that like next business I'm going to have is going to be tax exempt, you don't have a full jurisdiction to deal with these entities, and no one has, and I would like you to deal with that, but now my colleagues here have a concerns. We have actually a bipartisan bill, but a lot of my people here feel concerned with you that you're not going to be enforcing it properly, and you will use it as a power, to actually pick losers and winners again. So I wanted you to see how you can respond, with what you're doing in this area. I think there is a PBM, probably common ground. We have that area. But if we look at that, 50 to 60% of spend is, hospitals and physicians, 5 to 10 is actually only spent on drugs. So this is a huge amount of money. How would you respond what you're doing on that and how you would address some of these Republican concerns? Because I think your agency has some functions. But unfortunately, everything got so politicized. And a lot of people here on my side of the aisle don't feel comfortable to give any more power to your agency.
So thanks for the question, Congresswoman. You're absolutely right. We have a whole set of work streams underway relating to healthcare markets. We're concerned about instances in which monopolistic practices or a lack of competition in healthcare markets may be raising prices for consumers, maybe depriving them of access to quality healthcare. Our teams have for many years now been challenging hospital mergers where they've determined that the merger would either raise prices or lessen competition in ways that was harming patients. We have work underway, as we've talked about extensively today, relating to PBMs and the potential conflicts of interest that are created through their vertical integration, as well as issues that may be created through the rebate schemes that they have in place. We also have work looking more directly at drug prices and whether mergers and acquisitions done by pharmaceutical companies may be inhibiting innovation, maybe keeping lower cost alternatives out of the hands of American patients. So that's all work that we have underway, and we're working hard to move quickly on all of that.
Well, my time has expired, but we still need to figure out how you can address concerns of my colleague, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. I recognize.
Mr. Chairman, I'll be brief and yield my time since I'm kind of wasting my time here. I'll be honest with you. Secretary Mayorkas, do you take full responsibility for all decisions of action or inaction made at your agency? Do you personally take full responsibility
For
all of the decisions made at your agency?
I am the Secretary of the Department.
So it means yes.
I bear ultimate responsibility for the decisions
yes.
made.
Yes, okay. So you mentioned earlier that in your definition, you have operational control of the border. Can you define what you mean by that?
What we mean, because under the Secure Fence Act, it means that not a single individual would cross the border. Under that definition, no administration has had operational control.
So what number do you have? 5 million, 10, if less than 5 or 10, or less than a couple 100,000 get away or more? I mean, what is your definition?
What we do, Congresswoman, is we
Do you have a number?
What we do is we look at the resources that we have available to us and ask ourselves, are we deploying those resources to achieve the most effective results for the American people? That is what we do, and we are hopeful, working with you and other members of this committee, to increase the funding for the Department of Homeland Security.
So fun, we hear funding, but I've been at the border and you've been at the border too. How would you grade your job on a scale of 0 to 10? How would you grade yourself?
Congresswoman, I am immensely proud to work.
How would you grade yourself?
Congresswoman, I am immensely proud to work with the men and women of the Department of Homeland
yourself,
Security.
your job, not all of the women. I'm sure there are a lot of great men and women in your department. How would you rate your job as a head of your agency?
It is the honor of my life.
From 0 to 10, so you cannot grade it. How would grade your preparedness to this committee meeting on scale from 0 to 10? We ask information, you all these promises, letter. I'm not wasting my time. I'm sorry, I don't want to use bad word, what you can do with all these letters, because we keep giving money and sending letter and you tell us BS back. So how would you rate yourself, your preparedness to this committee?
It is the honor of my lifetime to work with the men and
From
women.
scale 0 to 10, how would you say how prepared you came to this hearing?
I will repeat what I said.
So you're not answering any questions. You are not answering any Republican question. Is it something that your intent to not respond to any questions of Republicans? You came with that intent.
That is incorrect, Congresswoman.
Well, you're not answering any questions.
It is.
I mean, every time I hear you say, we will, we shall, yeah, I don't know. You don't know any numbers. You don't even know how many people you actually, you prosecuted, how many people you deported. You're nothing. How can you say you know how your department is run? As executive, you don't know these numbers?
Congresswoman, let me share with you.
Well, you haven't shared anything useful here.
Let me share
I'm
with you.
sorry to tell you, I'll yield to Chairman Jordan because I'm not going to be wasting your time with this charade and circus. You do not have an intent to do that, and it is a serious national security issue. This border and cartels are stronger. A lot of money NGOs are making who knows what, and probably a lot of corruption over there. And we have a national security crisis, and you sitting here and saying, looking at us with very smiley face. It's unacceptable, but I yield to Chairman Jordan.
Gentlelady yields back. Ms. Spartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Norester, do you believe we should have unlimited immigration to our country?
Unlimited? No.
So you believe that we need to limit number of immigrants?
Yes, I especially believe, security threats, people convicted or
we should have some limited. Do you believe we should look at our immigration, how we can better serve our national interest?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And immigration to the U.S., legal immigration absolutely does that.
Okay, so we agree with you on some issues. Do you believe that our system is overwhelmed right now and it's extremely difficult to immigrate to this country legally?
It is extremely difficult and restrictive.
So
it
we
looks
have
like
some
a
agreement.
Soviet-style system.
Well, it's good that we have some agreement. Do you believe that what's happening in the border and how overwhelmed the border, it poses national security risks?
There are absolutely risks that are posed by it. They are.
So we have a problem over there. You believe the border needs to be secured?
Yes, absolutely. And the way to do that is by expanding, I think, legal immigration.
Well, that is part of it, because we need to have a better and look at that. But do we also need to make sure that we have proper border security, proper mechanism to deal with border security? Whichever tools, we can do that. Do you believe it needs to be secure border?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We do need a secure border. We should have a secure border. There are different perspectives of how to get there. In the same way that, Al Capone and a lot of organized crime was crushed by legalizing alcohol, I think that we can crush a lot of cartels and border crime and the chaos on the border, which is a travesty. The chaos is a travesty. Do that by increasing legal immigration to the United States to reduce the black market.
We have to look, it might have some effects, it depends how it is, but ultimately we are not right now created perverse incentive to human trafficking, drug trafficking, child labor, what's happening right now in places like Darien Gap. Is that correct? What we're doing is bad.
I would say that the immigration restrictions we have are an enormous subsidy to cartels and criminal organizations.
So we don't have disagreement on that. But let's talk a little bit about, I have an agreement, this problem being really punted for many years, and not just one president. But do you believe when president is not putting emphasis to help Border Patrol dealing with situation and not dealing right now where we have to overwhelm Border Patrol right now, it's magnified opportunities for cartel to take advantage of situation.
I think it's a perfect storm of many events. You have a very low unemployment in the United States, attracting large numbers of people coming in. I think that you have a restrictive system that makes it difficult for lawful people to come in. And I think you have other security issues that has resulted in a lot of the overwhelming, this overwhelming of Border Patrol. There is a lot of chaos. Nobody disagrees about that.
But do you believe, when my Democrat colleagues talking about comprehensive reform, it has to have a really significant conversation also over border security and how we can improve border security and be more innovative and make sure that we mitigate some of the risk and support our Border Patrol. Does it need to be part of it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the best way to do that, the best way for Border Patrol and for the U.S. government to regulate the flow of people in the United States is to legalize it, because you can't regulate a black market.
But what I said, we can have a debate about legal immigration, but we also should have a debate how we can secure a border better, correct?
I agree, but I think they're linked. I don't think you can do one without the other.
They're linked, and we should link, but unfortunately, we kind of having this chicken and egg situation where one side says we need to, because it's not. It needs to be a comprehensive solution, because this is not a joke situation on that border. It is a national security issue. It is a national security issue not just for border state. It's for all of the states, whether it's New York or Indiana, and now we allow also, cartels in China to really become in very material drug trafficking and fentanyl and what's happening in the country. It is going to be a big problem. So I hope you encourage your colleagues to look at the situation too, and look how not just, because we never have that conversation. We do it in politicking. And we have a very dangerous situation on the border. We have to acknowledge it as a country. I came here as a legal immigrant. This is country created by immigrants, but we need to have an orderly process. We cannot have anarchy with the country of law. Otherwise, we will become like third world country with cartels running the country, and we cannot let it happen. So I hope you will help me to talk to your colleagues, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. And
A very moving statement about your grandparents coming here from Belarus to live in the country without fear of prosecution. I grew up in very similar country, Ukraine now, and when I came here as a young person, I believed in the value as an American not to be afraid of my government. But I wanted to tell you, and I want to share with you and get your thoughts on that. Are you aware that a lot of Americans are now afraid of being prosecuted by your department? Are you aware about that? Are you aware of that? I'm just saying, are you aware or not?
I think that constant attacks on the department and saying
No, it's not attacks. Well, let me give you an example.
I don't know
we talk about January 6th. People.
I'm sorry?
Here, some people came on January 6th. There probably were some people that came on January 6th here, that had bad intent. But a lot of good Americans from my district came here because they are sick and tired of this government not serving them. They came with strollers and the kids, and there was chaotic situation because the proper security wasn't provided. That's a question that was answered really why. Why we debated for 45 minutes on the floor and didn't stop the debate after the people broke into the Capitol. But these people came, they were throwing the smoke bombs into the crowd with strollers with kids. People were showed up, FBI agent to people's houses. You had in my district, in my town, FBI phone numbers all over the district. Please call that. People are truly afraid. I just want to make sure if you're not aware that you are. And this is a big problem when people are afraid of their own government. And I'll share some other things. We're talking about justice system. I don't question, you're probably not a bad person. I don't know you. But what I'll tell you, you're in charge of the department. And people right now feel, I look at Durham report and I call on the FISA violations of queries of millions of Americans, right? It's like KGB, but when I read Durham reports, we have this, you have a nice, playbook. First, let's have a special counsel, and then you don't have to answer any questions here. Then, let's extend slow walk investigation on Hillary Clinton, on Hunter. Everything is slow walk. We were very quick on Donald Trump, but you were very slow walk. Then, by the time, that investigation ended, statute of limitation expired, and all of your agents need to be tested for amnesia. No one recalls anything. Okay, you probably should have as part of your hiring policy. So no one held accountable, which was egregious what happened, in that report. When I read about them, I can't believe it happened in the United States of America. This is my frustration. I'll be honest with you. Then it's very interesting, regardless what it is, even people in Obama administration raised concerns. How can President's sons be serving on, corrupt Ukrainian oligarchs? Do you understand that it actually can undermine the one Ukrainian effort and policy? I think these concerns were raised. The Obama administration didn't do anything about it. These people are dying right now, and Americans don't trust this president. So I want to ask you one thing. I don't need answer because I know you're not going to, but I think you're probably a good American and you care. And a lot of these people are so afraid they cover up this stuff, I think, in your department because they're embarrassed that what we became as a country to say that what our Department of Justice became. That allows Russians to do propaganda in Chinese. It allows them to destabilize our country. That is danger to our republic. It is significant danger. And I have just one more question from you. I agree on corporate crimes and FISA stuff, even with Democrats, that we need to do a better job. One more question for you. Do you believe that, you talk about rights to vote, but do you believe that only U.S. citizens should be voting in this election and doing anything to make sure that only eligible people vote in elections?
Yes and yes.
Okay, I would like to see that, what you do. Thank you. Kneel back.
And now go to my very good friend from Indiana, Ms. Spartz, and gentlelady's recognized for make any comments about any amendments she cares.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm becoming a frequent guest in your committee, but I shall like your committee, and I appreciate you willing to have debate and deliberation and consideration, and that's what the democratic process in Congress should be, so I appreciate you do that. I have one amendment that I haven't discussed before. It's related to Foreign Operations Appropriations Act, but I think it's a very important amendment, and it's a very simple amendment, but I think it's very important. All it says is, no funds from this bill, unless they were authorized by Congress, should be provided to the United Nations. And I tell you why it is very important. I think we should be authorizing all of the fund, and we can, because ultimately that's for us a way to look, what is good, what is bad, what is organization are doing. And the United Nations doesn't have the best track record. I'll be honest with you, dealing with a lot of tough crises, whether it's in Ukraine, whether it's Africa. I haven't seen them on the ground. I've seen them in very expensive hotels, eating very expensive steak dinners. I'm paying good salaries to their staff, and people are dying. And I think we should start asking questions why. we are financing these organizations. We actually just went to the Middle East with some of my colleagues, and just with our discussion, it was a bipartisan, not a partisan concern. We were talking to a variety of countries. Almost every other country told us, oh, we're not going to give money to this corrupt organization. And why should we, at the American Congress, to do? And if it doesn't go to the people, we talk to the people on the ground, whether it's Syria or Yemen or Poland or whatever. They say, we've never seen this organization. We're not sure what they're doing. And we have some serious crises that United States taxpayers are spending a lot of money. We're generous people. We help around the world a lot. But I think we want to make sure that their money actually helps the people, not some people become very wealthy. I think these are important questions we need to ask. And I think if we haven't got through that process, and if this, actual specific spending wasn't authorized, we shouldn't be waiving these processes and let this money to be spent by Secretary of State whenever they want to spend. So I think it's a very common sense, very important amendment, and hopefully we'll do a better job with our authorization next year. I think it is #1 primary function of this institution, and the only function, how we can hold the other branch accountable to the American people. When we don't do that, we have no way to hold accountability. So I would appreciate for your support of this amendment. I think it's very meaningful, and honestly, if we have to give, and help some countries, maybe we should rethink how we're doing, because a lot of this international organization not helping anyone, and I think we have to be much wiser with our money as a country. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Chair has no questions. I want to make one quick comment, and I just want to, #1, thank all of you for being here as well. It's nice of you to compliment the committee, but you've spent at least as much time yourself and in more uncomfortable chairs. So #1, thank you for being here. #2, a number of you have mentioned the importance.
We all believe that these bills should go separately in a perfect world. That's not where we are right now. So this bill to prevent the government from shutting down, which nobody has seen yet, that you're going to work out in the next few days, which I assume if it's reflective of what's in these appropriations bills, will probably not fly amongst, forget Senate Democrats, even Senate Republicans. There'll be another bill here. I just want to make sure that whatever comes back gets scheduled, and then we have an opportunity to vote on it. So Mr. Gates is no on a stopgap measure to keep the government running. I'll put you down as a maybe, depending on whatever it is. Ms. Spartz?
Well, I want to share some things. I actually frustrated that we're where we are, but you know what? Sometimes crisis and frustration maybe can learn us that we need to do better. And I hope we will do better than we've done for many years when we've governed through crises and through continuous resolutions. So my position, I am very reluctant to do that, but if we're really truly doing some work, I'm willing to support short-term extension of funding, but we do need to come together on a few very material issues. To secure our border should be bipartisan consensus and have better solution to move the needle on debt. We should have a debt commission that look at some things, and you know what? Some things might take a president with vision and backbone to do, but some things we can. We have abuse in the system, and some of these programs are, being abused by very large stakeholders that are, feeling pretty good in Washington, D.C. But we need to start looking on some and find it shouldn't be a partisan issue because it's a national security issue. So I actually reach out, and there are some agreement even among Democrats or, problem solvers. I reach out to Senate, and I'm reaching out to Senate Democrats and Senate Republicans. I say, you know what? If the Senate doesn't want to deal with that, then be honest. And don't campaign that you care about 30 trillion of debt. Just be honest and say, I do not care. We'll let our republic fall. And we'll be spending interest to China. We'll spend on interest more than on national defense very shortly. Our debt to GDP ratio will be higher soon after than World War II. This is national security crisis. So national security crisis is at the border. And national security crisis with our debt should be two issues that Republican and Democrats should come together for this country. And I hope we're going to have this moving forward.
Ms. Boebert?
Would the gentleman yield?
Yeah, happy to yield.
I want to thank you for doing the whip count for Whip Emmer and myself.
Indiana's recognized to address whatever amendment she cares to.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief, even though someone who is, as a CPA who spent a big part of my career in public accounting and was in financial services, capital markets division of Big Four for managed engagements for it. I could do a lot of engagement amendments for financial services, but I'll do for general government piece. And I think I have very important amendment which is actually introduces into this appropriation a bipartisan bill, which dealing with that through bipartisan process of that commission. I was very, very happy that chairman actually discussed this issue on the floor because this is a very serious issue. We should start playing politics with people's life. We really need to have a serious conversation. We'll be spending soon more on interest than on national defense. A lot of our funds are going bankrupt, and we need to be adults in the room and have a serious conversation how we can get our fiscal house under control and have some reforms that we can keep promises to the Americans we promised, and how we can reform to be more innovative going forward. So that's all this amendment just does. It adds the bill. I think that we already introduced. It was 5779, just with a small change where outside expert wouldn't have an ability to vote on the recommendations that will go through expedited procedures for the floor. That's the only difference. Otherwise, it's a great bill. It's a bipartisan bill, and I hope this committee will have a bipartisan support for this amendment. And thank you so much, and I yield back.
Thank you. I have no questions.
As recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here. As someone who grew up in Soviet Union under tyranny, and also been enlightened, when Soviet Union fell apart, and I went to college of a diversity of ideas and freedom of ideas we had in debate what university should be. I was very shocked when I came here young, very idealistic, learning from Alexis de Tocqueville and Voltaire and Friedman and Hayek, and inspired by this idea, what a tyranny of opinion we have. And unless you agree with who is in charge, whether the president's a university or who's in charge of government, you actually can have a mob rule and actually, try to intimidate you. So I think it is a very dangerous trend. And I truly believe, if we do not do something about it, we're going to fail as a republic. A lot of people don't realize that republic, we're not a pure democracy for a reason. We actually, republic to protect rights of minority to express opinions unless they're harmful and try to hurt. So I was very disappointed also, and it was very strange to me when I first came here and we started to put people in categories, woman, male, black, white. I was like, they only did it to Jews in Soviet Union to oppress them. I was like, why are we doing that? Was very strange to me because it's divisive. It divides us. We're all Americans that believe in our country and our ideas, and we have to fight for them. So my question is for you, Mr. Marcus, just briefly. Do you think we should really rethink how we're doing it, so how we can unite the country with our ideas instead of separating and dividing us constantly, talking about, because it shouldn't matter. I'm like, why should it matter? If I'm female or male, if I am real good at something, I'm going to pursue my happiness. So what do you think?
Thank you, Congressman. I agree, and here's the way I would put it. When we see the response of so many college students to such atrocities, the question shouldn't be, do we criticize, do we condemn, do we punish the speech? The question should be, how in the world did we get here? How did we get to a place where a significant portion of students at some of our best colleges and universities, students in many cases who view themselves as progressive leaders, have adopted some of the vilest values that one could possibly imagine? I think we have to say that this is not just a question of do we issue a statement, but do we say these institutions have to be completely rethought, and we have to figure out how is it that the moral fiber has frayed and what can we do to repair it?
And I appreciate it. And listen, I'm someone who actually went and, sometimes not a popular thing. I defended some crazy things that Marjorie says, and actually was one of the few Republicans. I wish actually somebody on the other side who tabled the resolution, because it was badly written resolution talking about October 18 event as insurrection. It was an insurrection as well as was January 6th was an insurrection. So let's just be honest. We need to have here start being honest and not play politics with people's life. And I hope people on the other side also will be able to do something where you go against your own party and get attacked and not to be afraid to do it. So my question is for all of you, just quickly, do you believe that diversity of ideas, freedom of speech, including conservative speech, should be protected on college campuses? Ms. Burdett, just yes or no?
Yes.
Dr. Nadel?
Yes.
Mr. Marcus?
Yes.
Ms. Silverstein?
Yes.
Ms. Jordan?
Yes.
Mr. Ogrzak, if I say it right. So do we believe that we do have protection of freedom of speech right now on college campuses? I'll start with you, Mr. Ogrzak.
Completely? No.
Ms. Jordan?
Nope.
Ms. Silverstein?
No.
Mr. Marcus?
No, ma'am.
Mr. Nadel? Dr. Nadel, sorry.
That's okay. I think we have mechanisms put in place to protect freedom.
But do we have it right now protected, freedom of speech and ideas and the real expression that people are not afraid?
Based on what some of the students have said, no.
Ms. Burdett?
Yes, we do. It's messy, and we need to make sure that the rules are applied fairly to these students.
So you believe conservative and all speeches are protected right now?
All speech is protected by the rules, and humans implement the rules.
So when we talk about our implementation, we have all this diversity inclusion, and it's becoming like a tyranny, unless you're the green, right? Is it correct? Are they effective with diversity? I'll talk about giving more money. Department of Education also accredits on help, justifies accreditation, but is it being effective? Just quickly, I know that my time has expired quickly. Are they being effective, this diversity, inclusion, all of this initiative?
No, it has not been.
No? Ms. Jordan?
It has absolutely not been.
Ms. Silverstein?
Definitely not, no.
Mr. Marcus?
Diversity and inclusion programs have been a mixed bag at best.
Dr. Nadel?
They're working on it.
Ms. Burdett?
The Emancipation Proclamation didn't work right away, but we had to work on it for hundreds of years. Don't give
I
up.
think we have a difference of opinion between students and adults, but thank you.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentlelady from Vermont is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be honest that many parts of this hearing have been extremely difficult to listen to. My grandfather, Leopold Ballant, was murdered in the Holocaust, and my...
It's back. The gentlelady from Indiana, Ms. Spartz, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Cantor, for being here today. We talk a lot about, monopoly, oligopoly problems, and you talk about individual liberties. But we do have a serious problem in every sector of the market with oligopoly, monopoly problem, whether it's healthcare, whether it's agriculture, whether big tech. And there are things that you take in tough cases, and I actually appreciate that you're willing to take tough cases. I actually had some agreements, even on bipartisan basis, to adjust our legal framework. Yeah. We cannot just allow companies to have unlimited immunities. We cannot allow companies not to have proper accountability and protection of property rights, including data protection, because that's become a new type of property, and we didn't define them. We do have challenges with consumer welfare standard, which maybe need to be defined a little bit more broadly and everything else. But don't you believe, we pass a lot of different laws, but in reality, you're treating the symptoms, but it seems like a lot of your cases, you get dismissed and or have weak evidence, you're really treating the symptoms. But unless we start looking at the causes, we passed Dodd-Frank for too big to fail. Our institutions became even bigger. So don't we need to start looking at barriers of entry and barriers to market competition of entry?
So absolutely. When we deal with monopolization concerns, we need to go make sure that we're focused on core monopolies and core considerations or conditions that, if they violate the law, sustain monopoly or oligopoly positions. And so we've undertaken that effort in our investigations.
But you can do only symptoms. The barriers of entry that we create in a lot of ways, either through USDA regulation, either through bills, you cannot deal with that. Is that correct?
Well, we are law enforcement.
You
authority.
cannot come after USDA, right? So we are the only people who can, right, enforce if our agency creates barrier of entry. Is that correct?
So again, we are focused, I have a very narrow job, is to enforce the antitrust laws as written by Congress.
Right. So I think the challenge is you will not be able to deal with this, and it's become very ineffective. We have oligopoly problems in every sector of the market. Is that correct?
Well, I think we have...
In most.
In many markets, there are monopolies and oligopolies. I do believe that antitrust enforcement can be an effective tool, and when the facts and the law support it, to help promote competition. You can't have a functioning marketplace without market participants.
Right. And so generally barriers of entry, if we don't have new entries too, that causes significant problems. Is that correct?
There can be many causes to barriers of entry, yes.
Right. So, and a lot of them are legislative.
I will defer to Congress regarding legislation. Again, I'm focused on anti-competitive conduct that violates the law.
So what are your thoughts about the consumer welfare standard? What are your thoughts about that?
So as I indicated before, I think if you ask 5 antitrust lawyers, what does the consumer welfare standard mean? You often get 6 different answers. It's difficult to have a standard if there's no broad-based agreement as to what it means. The welfare of consumers is an important objective. It's an essential objective for the antitrust laws, but so is the welfare of workers, so is the welfare of innovators.
But it's probably, in some cases, it's more just than price, correct?
It's absolutely more than price.
Right. But it's very difficult to argue in any other cases, if it's not a price. It's becoming much more difficult because precedent has been just a price issue. Is that correct?
Well, I think we have an obligation to make sure that we are bringing cases to courts that present issues in the way they appear in the marketplace. And sometimes that will be in the form of higher prices, but sometimes that might be in the form of less innovation or harm to, for example, the marketplace of ideas.
Yeah, or access. One more question. So we had a kind of discussion, and it's a very convoluted process, your relationship with FTC and DOJ. If you would literally look to restructure that process, because it's very strange how it's set up, how would you do that to make it more efficient antitrust enforcement?
If you beg my indulgence, I think my kids would answer that by saying, new phone, who dis? So I think ultimately it's up to Congress to create institutions and determine how those institutions and what their authorities are. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I've got a job, which is to be an antitrust enforcer at the Department of Justice, and I will focus on doing that job to the best of my ability and with the trust of the public.
So do you believe you efficiently set up your agency as you're in charge of your division? Is your division set up as efficient as it can be, or there are some improvements in your division that we should address for your division specifically?
Yeah, there are always improvements.
But can you state some?
Yeah, we've for example, we've looked to make our information more accessible to the public, to change the language of antitrust. We've opened investigations that focused on labor effects. We have created organizational streamlining to make sure that processes are more efficient and decisions can be made more expeditiously, but with the same level of protections and oversight. We are constantly making sure that we are evaluating how we run our divisions so that we can deliver the best results for the public as efficiently and as inexpensively as possible.
Thank you. My time expired. I'll back.
Jan is recognized to address whatever amendment she cares to.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief, even though someone who is, as a CPA who spent a big part of my career in public accounting and was in financial services, capital markets division of Big Four firm, managed engagements for it. I could do a lot of engagement amendments for financial services, but I'll do for general government piece. And I think I have very important amendment which is actually introduces into this appropriation a bipartisan bill, which dealing with that through bipartisan process of that commission. I was very, very happy that chairman actually discussed this issue on the floor because this is a very serious issue. We should start playing politics with people's life. We really need to have a serious conversation. We'll be spending soon more on interest than on national defense. A lot of our funds are going bankrupt, and we need to be adults in the room and have a serious conversation how we can get our fiscal house under control and have some reforms that we can keep promises to the Americans we promised, and how we can reform to be more innovative going forward. So that's all this amendment just does. It adds the bill. I think that we already introduced. It was 5779, just with a small change where outside expert wouldn't have an ability to vote
on the recommendations that will go through expedited procedures for the floor. That's the only difference. Otherwise, it's a great bill. It's a bipartisan bill, and I hope this committee will have a bipartisan support for this amendment. And thank you so much, and I yield back.
Thank you. I have no questions for the panel. Gentlelady from
The chair will now recognize the gentlewoman from Indiana, Ms. Victoria Spartz, for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, my fellow Hoosier. I'll be brief, and I think this committee needs to do a very important job, and unfortunately, we are not. We can talk about balancing something. Congress hasn't even tried to balance anything for a while. Two-thirds of our spending is on steroids, recurring, because we're so weak, we're afraid to vote on it and really deal with that. And the rest of it, we cannot touch most of it. We cannot even pass appropriations bill. We keep increasing the amount of unauthorized spending for decades. So it's a very, very serious situation. Our growth in GDP will not be covering now even growth in interest, and how much debt has to be refinanced in the next few years at this interest rate and slow down in the economy. We'll reach soon the point where half of our spending will go on interest, just interest on debt. And that is going to be collapse of our economy. And the only way to solve it will be, if we continue punting these issues, it's double taxes on the middle class, because everyone here is afraid to reform anything. So doubling taxes in the middle class, which paid roughly about, if you add all taxes, 50%, now probably you'll get to 80%, will have socialism. And unfortunately, we had lots of discussions, lots of good things, and I appreciate your committee had hearing on that commission recently. There are a lot of good people here in the House been working, and I think there are a lot of these proposals. I work with a number of people, and we try to reconcile the differences, but I think at least in the House, we do have some bipartisan support, but the Senate is in trouble, because Senate only cares about elections, power, and unfortunately doesn't want to deal it on a bipartisan basis. So I would urge my colleagues here, Republicans and Democrats in your committee, to start really thinking about our country and what we're doing to our country, and have at least a conversation. Our debt, our credit rating was downgraded just because we're even not willing. We're so weak and worthless here that not willing to have a serious conversation that will be destructive for so many people. And inflation will destroy middle class in our country, and opportunities for people on lower income and people on fixed income. So I think this is a very serious national security crisis. I think Budget Committee needs also look how we can reform. We did some reforms at the beginning of last century, then we did at the end, closer to the end of the century, but realized that it's not working. We're not budgeting here. We do a lot of presentations and hearing, but not really looking. And number one functions was given to Congress by we the people. It's power of the purse and power of war, because our founding fathers understood that's the only way American people can have accountability. And I think this is a very, very important thing that we need to try to move the needle, and I hope we'll have a bipartisan support and support of this committee, and I'd be happy to help you in any way I can, and I appreciate Chairman really leading the charge on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Spartz. The chair will now